The autumn air in Connecticut always carried a specific kind of chill, the sort that settled deep into your bones and reminded you that the vibrant colors of the leaves were just a beautiful prelude to the cold, dormant winter. At 69 years old, I had come to appreciate the quiet of this season. My home, a modest colonial with a wraparound porch, was usually silent these days. The floorboards only creaked under my own weight. The mirrors only reflected my own face, a face framed by carefully styled silver hair, with lines etched around the eyes that mapped out decades of smiling, worrying, and above all, mothering. I was a widow, a retired school administrator, and an empty nester. But the title that had always defined me, the one that had consumed my entire identity since I was 29 years old, was mother. My son Harrison wasn't born to me. He came to me and my late husband, Robert, when he was just 2 years old, a frightened little boy with wide eyes and a turbulent past. We had chosen him, and in return, I made a silent vow to the universe that I would shield him from every hardship the world had to offer. I poured every ounce of my soul, every spare dollar, and every waking thought into Harrison. I bought him the best tutoring, drove him to endless hockey practices, and sacrificed my own retirement savings to ensure he could attend a prestigious university on the West Coast. And from the outside, looking in, my sacrifices had yielded a spectacular return on investment. Harrison was now a mid-level executive at a prominent tech firm in Silicon Valley. He drove a sleek, gunmetal gray Tesla, wore custom-tailored suits that probably cost more than my first car, and lived in a sprawling, multi-million-dollar suburban home with a manicured lawn that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. He was the epitome of the American dream. He was also, over the last few years, practically a stranger to me. The shift hadn't happened overnight. It was a slow, glacial drift. It started when he married Clara. Clara was a beautiful, quiet woman who had given up her own career in marketing to become a stay-at-home mother to my 2 beautiful grandchildren, Lily, who was 7, and Mason, who was 5. At first, I had tried to bridge the gap, offering advice, bringing over casseroles, trying to be the supportive mother-in-law. But there was always a thick, invisible wall between Clara and me. When I visited, her smiles were tight, her eyes evasive. She would retreat to the kitchen, leaving me alone with Harrison, who was usually glued to his smartphone, tracking the stock market or answering urgent emails. Harrison had a way of explaining it away. "Mom, you know how Clara is," he would whisper, rolling his eyes affectionately. "She gets defensive easily. She thinks you're judging her parenting. Just give her space." So I did. I stepped back. I became the grandmother who sent checks on birthdays, who visited only on major holidays, and who convinced herself that this was just the natural order of things. Children grow up, they build their own lives, and mothers learn to gracefully step into the shadows. I told myself it wasn't personal. I told myself I had done a good job. Then came the morning of my 69th birthday. It was a Tuesday. I woke up to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of rain against the bedroom window. There was a time when my birthday meant breakfast in bed, handmade cards with backward letters and sticky kisses. Now it meant a cup of black coffee and checking my iPad for generic Facebook greetings. At around 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and opened the door to find a delivery driver holding a small insulated package. I signed for it, feeling a sudden flutter of anticipation. I carried the box to the kitchen island and carefully cut the tape. Inside, resting on a bed of gold tissue paper, was a stunning velvet-covered box tied with a satin ribbon. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. It was a box of artisanal, handcrafted chocolate truffles from a boutique chocolatier in Switzerland. These weren't the kind of chocolates you bought at the grocery store. These were culinary masterpieces, dusted with edible gold and intricate sugar designs. I knew they must have cost a small fortune. Tucked beneath the ribbon was a thick, cream-colored card. "Happy birthday, Mom. I know I haven't been around much lately, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking of you. You always loved the dark cherry truffles. Treat yourself. You deserve it. Love, Harrison." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I traced my thumb over his signature, the dark cherry truffles. It was a detail so specific, so incredibly thoughtful. When Harrison was a boy, whenever Robert would buy me a box of assorted chocolates for Valentine's Day, I would always hunt for the dark cherry ones, savoring the bitter chocolate mixed with the sharp, sweet fruit. Harrison had remembered. For the first time in months, a profound wave of warmth washed over me. He did care. Beneath the busy schedule, the tech bro bravado, and the physical distance, my boy was still there. I untied the ribbon and opened the box. The aroma of rich, dark cocoa and sweet liqueur drifted up, intoxicating and decadent. There were 12 truffles in total. 3 of them, sitting perfectly in the center, were clearly the dark cherry ones, identifiable by the tiny crystallized cherry blossom resting on top of each. I reached out, my fingertips brushing the delicate surface of one of the cherry truffles. I was about to lift it to my lips when a familiar, deeply ingrained habit stopped me. "Treat yourself," the card had said, but I was a mother. And mothers of my generation were practically hardwired to deny ourselves indulgence if it could bring joy to our family instead. I pictured sitting alone in my quiet kitchen, eating these exquisite chocolates by myself. Then I pictured the wide, delighted eyes of Lily and Mason. Clara was incredibly strict about their sugar intake. Everything in their house was organic, gluten-free, and sugar-free. A real decadent European chocolate would be a magical treat for them. And perhaps, just perhaps, bringing such a beautiful, expensive gift to Clara might serve as an olive branch. It would show her that I wasn't hoarding Harrison's affections or his money. I closed the lid. The decision was made before I had even consciously thought it through. I would drive over to their house in the suburbs this afternoon. The drive to Harrison and Clara's neighborhood always made me feel a little out of place. My reliable 10-year-old Honda Civic looked like an antique as it rolled past sprawling estates with manicured hedges and circular driveways. Harrison's house was a modern farmhouse design, stark white with black trim and a massive, imposing oak door. I parked in the driveway and walked up to the porch, holding the velvet box carefully in both hands. I rang the doorbell. It took a few moments, but the door finally swung open. Clara stood there, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked exhausted. Despite the expensive athletic wear she was wearing, there were dark circles under her eyes, and her blonde hair was pulled into a messy, frantic bun. "Evelyn," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tight strain. What are you doing here? Did we have plans today?" "No, dear. I'm sorry to drop in unannounced," I said, putting on my warmest smile. "It's my birthday today, actually." Clara's face fell, a flash of genuine guilt crossing her features. "Oh, God. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. Harrison didn't say a word, and with the kids' schedules, I completely lost track of the date. Happy birthday. Please, come in." I stepped into the grand foyer. The house was impeccably clean, yet it somehow always felt cold to me, lacking the lived-in warmth of a real home. "It's perfectly fine, Clara. I know how busy you are. Harrison actually sent me these." I held out the velvet box. "They arrived this morning. Handcrafted Swiss truffles." Clara looked at the box, then back up at me, clearly confused. "He sent those to you? For your birthday?" "Yes, but you know me," I chuckled softly. "I shouldn't be eating rich sweets at my age. My doctor would have a fit about my cholesterol. I thought Lily and Mason might enjoy a special treat. And you too, of course." Clara hesitated, looking at the box as if it were a strange artifact. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that looked almost like resentment, or perhaps deep exhaustion. I had learned over the years not to try and decode Clara's micro-expressions. "That's very kind of you, Evelyn," she finally said, reaching out to take the box. "The kids are upstairs doing their reading homework, but I'll let them have one after dinner. Are you sure you don't want to keep them? Harrison bought them for you." "I'm positive. The thought was enough for me," I said genuinely. "Just tell Harrison I love them when he gets home." I didn't stay long. The air in the house felt too heavy, and I didn't want to overstay my welcome. I drove back to my quiet, empty house, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and melancholy. I had done the right thing, the selfless thing. I spent the rest of my birthday evening reading a mystery novel and eating a modest bowl of soup. I went to bed early, telling myself that it had been a good day. I was wrong. The phone rang at 2:14 a.m. Anyone who has raised children knows the unique, visceral terror of a phone ringing in the dead of night. It is a sound that bypasses logic and strikes directly at the primitive core of your brain. My heart slammed against my ribs as I fumbled in the dark for the receiver on my nightstand. "Hello?" My voice was thick with sleep and fear. "Evelyn!" It was Clara. She was screaming. Not crying, not talking loudly. Screaming. The sound was raw, jagged, and filled with a primal panic that made the blood freeze in my veins. In the background, Beneath the shrill pitch of her voice, I could hear the chaotic, terrifying sounds of a hospital emergency room. Machines beeping frantically, the rapid squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, orders being barked by medical staff. Clara, calm down. What is it? What happened? I sat up, throwing the blankets off, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. It's Lily and Mason, she sobbed, her words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. They're sick, Evelyn. They're so sick. Mason is having seizures. Lily she can't breathe. She's vomiting blood. They don't know what's happening. The room spun. I'm coming. I'm leaving right now. Which hospital? Clara, where is Harrison? He's in San Francisco on a business trip. He took a red-eye out this evening. I can't reach him. It's going straight to voicemail. Evelyn, you have to get here. Mount Sinai emergency room. Please. I'm on my way. I don't remember getting dressed. I don't remember the drive down the empty interstate, though I must have been doing 20 miles over the speed limit. My mind was a terrifying loop of Clara's screams and the images of my bright, beautiful grandchildren in agony. When I burst through the sliding doors of the ER, the bright fluorescent lights felt like an assault. I found Clara in the waiting area. She looked like a ghost. Her athletic wear was stained with something dark and terrible. She was shaking violently, her arms wrapped around herself. I rushed to her, pulling her into my arms. For the first time in years, she didn't pull away. She collapsed against my chest, weeping with a desperation that broke my heart. What did the doctor say? I demanded gently, stroking her hair. What is it? Food poisoning? An allergic reaction? Clara pulled back, her eyes wild and bloodshot. They don't know. We had dinner. Just baked chicken and broccoli. Nothing unusual. Then, around 8 o'clock, I let them open the box you brought. The chocolates. They were so excited. Lily had 3. Mason had 2. A cold, heavy stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. About an hour later, Clara choked out, Mason started complaining that his stomach burned. Then Lily started throwing up. I thought it was just a stomach bug. But then Mason's legs gave out. He couldn't stand. And Lily started convulsing on the bathroom floor. The chocolates, the beautiful artisanal truffles from Switzerland. Clara, did you tell the doctors about the chocolates? I asked, my voice trembling. Yes, I brought the box with me. The toxology team has it right now. She buried her face in her hands. Evelyn, what was in them? What did you give them? Nothing. Clara, I swear to you, I didn't even open the wrappers. Harrison sent them to me. They came straight from the delivery driver to your house. Before Clara could respond, my cell phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out. The caller ID flashed on the screen. Harrison. It's him, I said to Clara, hitting the green button and putting the phone to my ear. Harrison, thank God. Are you in San Francisco? Clara couldn't reach you. Mom. Harrison's voice sounded strange. It wasn't the frantic, panicked tone of a father who had just checked his voicemail to find out his children were dying in an emergency room. It was tight, strained, breathless. Harrison, you need to get on the next flight back, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's Lily and Mason. They're at Mount Sinai. They're terribly sick. The doctors think it might be food poisoning from— Mom, listen to me, Harrison interrupted. His voice cracked, rising in pitch. Did you eat the chocolates? The question stopped my breath. It was so completely out of context, so jarringly inappropriate given the situation. Why wasn't he asking about his children? Why wasn't he asking what the doctors were doing? What? I stammered. Harrison, your children are in the emergency room having seizures, and you're asking me? Answer me! He roared. The sheer volume and aggression in his voice made me flinch, pulling the phone an inch away from my ear. I had never, in 38 years, heard my son use that tone with me. Did you eat the chocolates, Evelyn? Yes or no? Evelyn. Not Mom. Evelyn. No, I whispered, the cold stone in my stomach suddenly turning into jagged ice. No, Harrison, I didn't eat them. I took them to Clara's house. I gave them to Lily and Mason. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the kind of silence that has a physical weight to it. I could hear his breathing, ragged, shallow, panicked breaths. Harrison? I asked, my voice shaking. Harrison, what's going on? You didn't eat them, he repeated, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. It didn't sound like relief. It sounded like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. You didn't eat a single one? No, I told you. I gave them to your children. They ate them. Harrison, what was in those chocolates? You stupid, stupid old woman, he hissed. The venom in his voice was so pure, so concentrated it felt like a physical slap across the face. You always have to be the martyr, don't you? You always have to give everything away. You couldn't just eat the damn chocolates. Harrison, he hung up. I stood there in the glaring light of the emergency room, staring at the darkened screen of my phone. The air around me seemed to have vanished. The beeping monitors, the crying children down the hall, Clara's frantic sobbing. It all faded into a muffled underwater hum. My mind raced, connecting dots that I desperately, violently did not want to connect. He hadn't asked about his children. He only cared if I had eaten the gift. He was furious, not relieved, that I hadn't. The dark cherry truffles, my favorite. He made sure I knew which ones were meant specifically for me. Evelyn? Clara was pulling on my sleeve, her eyes wide with terror. What did he say? Is he coming? Before I could form words, a doctor in pale green scrubs approached us. His expression was grim, his jaw set tightly. Mrs. Vance? Mrs. Vance? He addressed Clara, then looked at me. I'm the grandmother, I managed to say, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. We got the preliminary toxicology report back on the stomach contents and the remaining chocolates you brought in, the doctor said, keeping his voice low but urgent. This isn't food poisoning, and it's not an allergic reaction. Clara gripped my hand so hard her nails dug into my skin. Then what is it? The doctor looked directly into my eyes, and I saw the exact moment his professional detachment gave way to profound shock. It's thallium, he said softly. The word hung in the air, foreign and terrifying. Thallium? Clara repeated, uncomprehending. What is that? Like a pesticide? It's a heavy metal, the doctor explained. It's highly toxic. It used to be used in rat poison decades ago, but it's been banned in the U.S. for years because it's colorless, odorless, and virtually tasteless. The children ingested a significant amount. He paused, looking at us with a mixture of pity and grave concern. Ladies, I have to be honest with you. Thallium poisoning doesn't happen by accident in a modern commercial kitchen. Someone deliberately laced those chocolates. I've already notified the police. They're on their way to take your statements. Clara let out a choked gasp and sank into the plastic waiting room chair, burying her head in her knees. I didn't sit down. I couldn't. I stood perfectly still, feeling the foundation of my entire existence crumbling beneath my feet. Thallium, rat poison, colorless, tasteless. Treat yourself, Mom. You deserve it. My son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed, the man whose Ivy League education I had funded with my retirement savings, had meticulously planned to murder me on my 69th birthday. And because of my lifelong, ingrained habit of putting everyone else before myself, I had unknowingly handed my own death sentence to my grandchildren. I looked at Clara, weeping uncontrollably in the chair. I looked at the double doors leading back to the pediatric ICU where 2 innocent children were fighting for their lives. And then I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but not from fear anymore. The shock was beginning to recede, and in the void it left behind, something else was taking root. It was a cold, hard, crystalline clarity. For 40 years I had been the selfless mother. I had been the silent, accommodating woman who stepped aside, who asked for nothing, who made excuses for the boy who broke my heart a little more every day. The woman who walked into this hospital was a vulnerable, lonely widow. But the woman standing here now, armed with the horrifying truth of what her son truly was, she was something else entirely. The grief was there, yes, a massive, suffocating wave of it. But beneath the grief was an ember of absolute, unforgiving fury. Harrison thought I was a stupid, weak old woman. He thought I was an easy target, a problem he could eliminate from 1,000 miles away with a ribbon-tied box. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. The police arrived at the emergency room 20 minutes later. 2 detectives in rumpled suits, smelling faintly of stale coffee and rain. They asked the standard questions. Who bought the chocolates? Where were they delivered? Was the package sealed? Clara answered them through her tears, handing over the crushed velvet box and the cream-colored card as if they were radioactive. When the older detective, a man with tired eyes named Miller, turned to me, I made a choice that would dictate the rest of my life. Mrs. Vance, Can you think of anyone who would want to harm your family? He asked gently. A disgruntled employee of your son's? An ex-partner? I looked at Clara, who was staring at me, waiting for me to tell them about the phone call, waiting for me to tell them that my own son, her husband, had just called and inadvertently confessed to knowing the chocolates were lethal. But a sudden, terrifying clarity gripped me. If I told them now, what proof did I actually have? A phone call with no recording. Harrison would deny it. He was a wealthy, articulate executive with the resources to hire the best defense attorneys in New York and Connecticut. He would claim I misunderstood him in my panic. He might even twist it to suggest Clara tampered with the chocolates to get back at him, or that I had lost my mind in my old age. He would muddy the waters, post bail, and then he would know that I knew. I would lose the only advantage I had, the element of surprise. I needed ironclad proof, and more importantly, I needed to understand why. Murder is rarely random. It is driven by passion or by profit. Harrison was a man devoid of deep passion. He viewed the world through the lens of transactions and assets. It had to be about money. No, detective, I said, my voice remarkably steady, playing the part of the bewildered, devastated grandmother to perfection. My son is a good man. He works in software. We live very quiet lives. I can't imagine who would do something so evil. Clara's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with betrayal. I gave her a sharp, imperceptible shake of my head. Not here. Not now. By dawn, the doctors delivered the miracle we had been praying for. The children had been administered Prussian blue, the antidote for thallium toxicity. They were weak, their tiny bodies battered, but the toxin was being flushed from their systems. They were going to survive. Harrison arrived at the hospital later that morning, rushing through the double doors with his tie loosened and a look of manufactured terror plastered across his handsome face. He played the role of the distraught father flawlessly, weeping by his children's beds, holding Clara's hand. I couldn't look at him. I told Clara I was feeling faint, my blood pressure was spiking, and I needed to go home to rest. As I walked past Harrison in the corridor, he reached out to touch my arm. "Mom, I'm so glad you're okay," he whispered, his eyes searching mine for any sign that I had figured it out. I forced myself to look into the eyes of the man who had tried to murder me. I summoned 40 years of maternal acting, every fake smile I'd given when he brought home a terrible report card, every forced cheer at a freezing hockey game. "I'm just so tired, Harrison," I murmured, letting my shoulders slump, embodying the frail, shaken old woman he believed me to be. "Just take care of your family." I went home to my quiet house. I locked the doors, drew the blinds, and sat at my kitchen table. The silence, usually a comfort, now felt like a war room. I didn't need a traditional private investigator who would tail Harrison and take photos of him eating lunch. I needed someone who understood the language Harrison spoke. I needed someone who could dissect his life not through his actions, but through his ledgers. I opened my laptop and searched for a forensic accountant. 3 days later, I was sitting in the cramped, intensely air-conditioned office of Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was a man who looked like he hadn't seen the sun in a decade. He wore a cheap, wrinkled suit and thick-rimmed glasses, and his desk was an avalanche of manila folders and tax codes. He didn't look like a hero, but in the world of financial deception, he was a lethal predator. "I need you to look into my son's finances," I told him, handing over a check for his retainer that made my stomach clench. "And I need you to look into mine. Everything. Every account, every tax return, every credit inquiry." Arthur didn't ask about the drama. He just took the check and the authorization forms I had signed. "Give me 48 hours, Mrs. Vance." He didn't even need 48. He called me the next evening, his usually monotone voice edged with something that sounded remarkably like alarm. "Mrs. Vance, you need to come to my office right now." When I arrived, Arthur had 2 distinct piles of paper on his desk. "I started with your credit report just to establish a baseline," Arthur said, not making eye contact, his fingers tapping rhythmically on his keyboard. "Mrs. Vance, when did you take out the second mortgage on your home?" The room seemed to tilt. "I haven't. My home has been fully paid off since Robert died 12 years ago." Arthur sighed, a heavy scraping sound. He pushed the first pile of papers toward me. "Someone took out a second mortgage of $250,000 against your property 8 months ago. But that's just the beginning." I stared at the heavily redacted printouts, the numbers swimming before my eyes. "There are 6 credit cards opened in your name over the last 2 years," Arthur continued relentlessly. "All maxed out, totaling roughly $80,000 in unsecured debt. Your Social Security number has been completely compromised." "Harrison," I whispered. It wasn't a question. The funds from the mortgage and the cash advances from the cards were funneled through a series of LLCs, but they all eventually washed up in an offshore crypto exchange account and an online day trading platform. Whoever it was, they were making incredibly aggressive, highly leveraged bets on the market. Arthur finally looked up at me. "And they lost. Almost all of it." My hands were shaking so violently I had to clasp them together in my lap. Harrison wasn't just a murderer. He was a thief. He had stolen my identity, plunging me into massive debt to fund a gambling addiction disguised as tech investing. "If I had died," I said slowly, tracing the horrifying logic of my son's mind, "what would have happened to this debt?" "It would be tied to your estate," Arthur explained. "If your estate couldn't cover it, the creditors would write it off. But there's a missing piece. Your son wouldn't just kill you to erase a debt he secretly owed. People commit fraud to survive. They commit murder to profit." Arthur reached for the second pile of papers. "This took a bit more digging," he said softly. 14 months ago, a life insurance policy was taken out on you. The premiums are being paid by a shell corporation traced back to Harrison's home address. The policy is worth $2 million, and the sole beneficiary is Harrison Vance." The icy realization slammed into my chest, knocking the breath out of me. If the thallium had worked, if my heart had stopped in my sleep on my 69th birthday, the doctors would have chalked it up to a natural cardiac event for an elderly woman. The massive debts in my name would have been buried with me, and Harrison would have walked away with $2 million in clean, untraceable insurance money, completely wiping out his financial ruin before his wife or the IRS ever found out. It was a masterclass in sociopathic accounting. "There's one more thing," Arthur said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "He's recently received audit notices from the IRS regarding his personal income taxes. He's desperate, Mrs. Vance. The walls are closing in on him." "Print it all out," I said. My voice didn't tremble. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, forged steel. "I need every single document." The next morning, I bought a burner phone from a convenience store. I knew Harrison tracked Clara's location through their family cell phone plan, and I wouldn't put it past him to be monitoring her calls. I drove to a strip mall 3 towns over and dialed Clara's number. "Hello?" she answered, sounding utterly drained. The kids had been discharged the day before, but the nightmare was far from over. "Clara, it's Evelyn. Don't say my name." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Where have you been? Why did you lie to the police at the hospital? I almost told them everything." "If you had, he would be out on bail right now, preparing to destroy us both in court, and you know it," I said sharply. "I needed proof, and I found it. You need to tell Harrison you are going to the pharmacy to pick up the children's prescriptions. Leave your cell phone in your car. Meet me at the Panera Bread off Route 7 in Westport. Do not tell him." "Evelyn, I'm scared. He's acting normal. He's making pancakes for the kids right now. It's making my skin crawl." "Get out of the house, Clara. Now." I arrived at the Panera Bread early. It was a bizarre, painfully mundane setting for the conversation we were about to have. The smell of baking sourdough and roasting coffee filled the air. Cheerful acoustic music played from invisible speakers. It was the epitome of safe, suburban America. Clara walked in 20 minutes later. She looked like a shadow of the polished, perfect housewife she usually portrayed. She wore an oversized sweater, no makeup, and her eyes darted around the restaurant with the paranoid intensity of a hunted animal. She spotted me in the corner booth and practically collapsed into the seat across from me. "Show me," she demanded, her voice a ragged whisper. I didn't offer her platitudes. I didn't ask how the kids were doing. I already knew they were recovering physically, even if the emotional scars would last a lifetime. I simply slid the thick manila folder across the laminated table. "Open it." Clara opened the folder. As she flipped through the credit reports, the mortgage documents bearing my forged signature, and the $2 million life insurance policy, all the color drained from her face. "He stole your identity," she breathed, her finger tracing the massive negative balances. "He's bankrupt. We're bankrupt. The house, the cars. It's all built on debt. Worse, I said, leaning in. He's facing an IRS audit. He didn't send those chocolates because he hated me, Clara. He sent them because he was about to be exposed. I was his $2 million bailout plan. Clara closed the folder and pressed her palms to her eyes, letting out a stifled, agonizing sob. My God, he almost killed his own children to cover his gambling debts. How did I not see this? How did I not know who I was sleeping next to? Because he made sure you were looking the other way, I said gently. Clara looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears, and then the dam broke. He told me you hated me, Evelyn, she whispered, the words tumbling out like a confession. From the very beginning, he said you thought I was a gold digger. He said you judged me for quitting my job to stay home with the kids, that you thought I was lazy. Every time you came over, he would prime me beforehand, telling me to watch out for your passive-aggressive comments. So I kept my distance. I was always on the defensive. I felt a physical ache in my chest. And he told me that you thought I was an overbearing, toxic monster, I replied, the cruel brilliance of my son's manipulation finally laying bare. He said you wanted to keep the children away from me because you thought my parenting style was outdated and dangerous. He said you demanded space. We stared at each other across the table, two women who had spent a decade orbiting the same man, manipulated into viewing each other as the enemy. It was classic gaslighting, classic triangulation. By keeping us isolated and suspicious of one another, Harrison ensured we would never sit down over a cup of coffee and compare notes. He ensured we would never realize that the money didn't add up, that his late nights at the office were spent making manic crypto trades, that the perfect life he projected was a hollow, rotting shell. He separated us to control us, Clara said, her voice dropping the pitch of a panicked victim and adopting the hard, flat tone of a survivor. Yes, I agreed. But he made a mistake. He got desperate, and he underestimated both of us. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. She sat up straighter, looking at the manila folder, and then looked directly at me. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a fierce maternal ferocity that I recognized instantly. It was the same fire burning inside my own ribs. The police are still investigating the chocolates, but they have no leads. They think it might have been tampering at the factory in Switzerland, Clara said, her voice completely steady now. If Harrison realizes the IRS is closing in and the insurance money isn't coming because you didn't eat the thallium, he will run, I finished for her. Or worse, he will try again. He knows he's on borrowed time. What do we do, Evelyn? Clara asked, reaching across the table and grabbing my hand. Her grip was tight, desperate, but strong. I will do whatever it takes to protect my children. I want him destroyed, not just in prison. I want him to lose everything. I looked down at our joined hands. For the first time since my husband died, I didn't feel alone. I had an ally, and together, we held the blueprints to Harrison's total destruction. We don't go to the police yet, I said, a plan forming in my mind with terrifying precision. If we do, he'll freeze the accounts, hire a shark of a lawyer, and drag this out for years. We hit him where it hurts him the most. We hit his money, Clara. We strip him of every single asset he thinks he has. We secure the children's future, and then we let him walk right into his own trap. Clara nodded slowly, a dark, understanding smile touching the corner of her lips. The mask had fallen. The mourning period was over. It was time to go to war. The digital equivalent of a bank robbery doesn't involve ski masks or getaway cars. It happens in the terrifying silent span of a few keystrokes. It was Thursday morning, exactly 48 hours after my meeting with Clara at Panera Bread. I was sitting at my kitchen island, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and staring at the rain lashing against the window panes when my burner phone vibrated against the granite countertop. It was Arthur Pendleton. "Mrs. Vance?" he said, skipping any semblance of a greeting. His voice, usually a flat, nasal monotone, was clipped and tight. "I have alerts set up on all your remaining pristine accounts. 5 minutes ago, a request was initiated to liquidate the 529 college savings plans for both Lily and Mason." My blood ran cold. When the children were born, I had opened those 529 plans, depositing a sizable chunk of my retirement into them to ensure their tuition would be covered, tax-free, when the time came. Because I was old-fashioned, and because I trusted my son implicitly at the time, I had made myself the primary account owner but designated Harrison as the authorized account manager. It meant he could move the investments around to maximize growth. It also meant he had the authorization to cash them out. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The combined balance is roughly $210,000, Arthur replied, the rapid clicking of his keyboard echoing over the line. "He's requesting an expedited wire transfer to a newly opened routing number." I ran a quick trace. It's an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands, a non-extradition jurisdiction. He was running. Harrison had realized the IRS was breathing down his neck, or perhaps he had checked the status of the credit cards he'd opened in my name and seen the fraud alerts Arthur had triggered. The net was closing, and my son was abandoning ship. He was going to steal his own children's futures to fund his escape. "Can you stop the transfer?" I demanded, already on my feet, searching blindly for my car keys. "I can flag it, which buys us a few hours of bureaucratic delay," Arthur said. "But he is a legally authorized manager on the account. To permanently block him, you need to strip his authorization, and you can't just do that over the phone with a customer service rep. We need a structural wall. I have a colleague, an estate attorney named Davis, standing by. If you can get to our office and sign the paperwork to transfer the 529 assets into an irrevocable trust, Harrison won't be able to touch a single dime, but you have to do it before the wire clears the International Clearinghouse at 1 p.m. I looked at the clock on the stove. It was 10:45 a.m. "I'm on my way." I grabbed my coat and dialed Clara's number as I ran to the garage. She answered on the first ring. "Evelyn? Where is he?" I asked, throwing myself into the driver's seat of my Civic and jamming the key into the ignition. "He's packing a bag," Clara said, her voice a hushed, terrified whisper. I could hear the faint sound of a shower running in the background. "He told me there's an emergency server crash at the Seattle data center. He said he has to fly out immediately and might be gone for a few weeks. Evelyn, he's taking his passport." "Who takes a passport to Seattle?" "He's not going to Seattle, Clara. He's trying to drain the kids' college funds and flee the country. Listen to me carefully. Let him leave. Do not confront him. The minute his car pulls out of the driveway, I want you to drive to Arthur Pendleton's office in Stamford. I'll meet you there." The drive to Stamford was a blur of slick asphalt and frantic racing thoughts. I broke several traffic laws, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. 40 years ago, I had driven this fast to get Harrison to the emergency room when he split his chin open on the playground. Now, I was racing to save his children from him. I arrived at Arthur's office building just as Clara's SUV pulled into the adjacent spot. We rode the elevator up in silence, the gravity of the moment pressing down on us like a physical weight. Arthur's colleague, Mr. Davis, was a stark contrast to the forensic accountant. He wore a crisp, expensive suit and had the calm, soothing demeanor of a seasoned surgeon. He had a stack of thick, legal documents waiting on the mahogany conference table. "Mrs. Vance, Clara, please sit," Davis said, handing me a heavy gold pen. "Arthur has briefed me on the urgency. What we are establishing here is a generation-skipping irrevocable trust. By signing these documents, you, Evelyn, are irrevocably surrendering your ownership of the 529 funds and transferring them directly into the legal entity of the trust. Clara will be named the sole trustee, managing the funds strictly for the beneficiaries, Lillian Mason." "And Harrison?" I asked, my pen hovering over the dotted line. "Once the ink is dry and we fax this to the brokerage holding the 529s, Harrison Vance ceases to exist in relation to this money," Davis said with grim satisfaction. "An irrevocable trust is a financial vault. You cannot break it, you cannot alter it, and Harrison cannot access it. The wire transfer he initiated will bounce back as unauthorized." I didn't hesitate. I signed my name over and over again, pressing the pen down so hard it almost tore the heavy parchment paper. Clara signed beside me, tears of profound relief sliding silently down her cheeks. "Done," Davis said, snatching the final page and handing it to Arthur, who immediately fed it into a high-speed scanner. It was 12:42 p.m. Across the state at John F. Kennedy International Airport, Harrison was likely sitting in a plush leather chair in the Delta Sky Club. I could picture him perfectly. He would be sipping a sparkling water, checking his Rolex, watching the minutes tick down to his flight to the Cayman Islands. He would have his smartphone in his hand, refreshing the brokerage app, waiting to see the $210,000 clear into his offshore account. He probably thought he had won. He probably thought he was the smartest man in the room, leaving his ruined finances, his poisoned mother, and his abandoned family in his rearview mirror. Arthur stared at his dual monitors, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The silence in the office was deafening. "The documents have been received by the brokerage's legal department," Arthur murmured, his eyes tracking lines of code I couldn't comprehend. "They are reviewing, processing the ownership transfer. The clock on the wall ticked. 12:48 p.m., 12:51 p.m. Suddenly, Arthur let out a sharp, unexpected bark of laughter. He leaned back in his chair and pushed his glasses up his nose. "The wire transfer just failed," Arthur announced, a rare smile breaking across his pale face. "Error code 403. Insufficient authorization. The assets have been successfully locked into the trust." Clara let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. I closed my eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. We had done it. We had cut off his escape route. Harrison was trapped. Without that money, he couldn't run. He couldn't vanish into a tropical tax haven and start over. He was stuck here, with a mountain of fraudulent debt, an impending IRS audit, and a police investigation into the thallium poisoning that was just beginning to heat up. "What will he do now?" Clara asked, wiping her eyes, the adrenaline fading to leave behind a cold, creeping dread. "He's at the airport. His flight leaves in an hour. When he realizes the money is gone, he'll panic," I said, a chilling certainty settling over me. A narcissist with his back against the wall is the most dangerous creature on earth. He can't run, so he will have to return, and he will need a scapegoat. I was right, but even in my darkest estimations of my son, I hadn't anticipated the sheer, diabolical cruelty of his next move. Harrison did not get on the plane. He took an Uber back to Connecticut, arriving at the house later that evening. He played the part of the frustrated businessman perfectly, telling Clara his flight was canceled due to a mechanical issue, and the Seattle crisis had been resolved remotely. Clara, acting on my strict instructions, played the dutiful wife. She served him dinner. She asked about his day. She pretended she didn't know he was a monster. The hammer fell the very next morning. I was at home, pruning the dead leaves off my African violets, trying to keep my hands busy, when my cell phone, my real one, not the burner, started ringing. It was Clara. "Evelyn," she said. Her voice wasn't just panicked this time. It was hollowed out, laced with a kind of shock that bordered on catatonia. "Clara, what's wrong? Did he hurt you?" "The police are here," she whispered. I could hear heavy footsteps in the background, the static of a police radio. "Detective Miller, they have a search warrant." "A warrant for what?" "My laptop," she choked out. "Evelyn, they're taking my laptop, and my iPad, and my cell phone." "Why would they want your devices?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Because Harrison went to the police station this morning before I woke up," Clara sobbed, the reality of her husband's betrayal finally crushing her. "He told them we've been having terrible marital problems. He told them he discovered I was having an affair, and he told them he thinks I tried to kill you." The shears slipped from my hand, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. "What?" "He told Detective Miller that I hated you, that I wanted you dead so Harrison would inherit your house and your savings, which would fix our financial issues. He said I intercepted the chocolates before the kids got them." Clara's breath was coming in short, hyperventilating gasps. "Evelyn, the detective said they got an anonymous tip yesterday from an IT server. Someone used our home IP address to access the dark web. Someone purchased thallium online 3 weeks ago. And the search history is on my personal laptop." The room spun. I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from falling. Harrison hadn't just tried to murder me. When his escape plan was thwarted, he pivoted with terrifying speed. He had anticipated the possibility of being caught. Weeks ago, while Clara was asleep or out with the kids, he had deliberately used her laptop to research and purchase the poison. He had planted a digital trail leading directly to his wife. He was framing the mother of his children for attempted murder. If Clara went to prison, he would have sole custody of the children. With Clara out of the way, He would have total control as their guardian, which meant he might find a legal loophole to challenge the irrevocable trust or drain the assets to pay for his legal defense. He would be the tragic, victimized husband whose wicked wife tried to murder his beloved mother. Society would pity him. The police would close the case. "Clara, listen to me," I said, forcing my voice to project a calm, commanding authority that I did not feel. "Do not say a word to the police, not one word. Do not try to explain it away. Invoke your right to an attorney immediately. I am calling Arthur and Davis right now. We are going to get you the best criminal defense lawyer in the state." "They're going to arrest me, Evelyn," she cried softly. "He planned this perfectly. He's going to take my babies away from me." "No, he is not," I said, a white-hot fury burning away the last remnants of the gentle, accommodating woman I used to be. "He thinks he's playing chess with a couple of ignorant housewives. He thinks he can sacrifice you to save his own skin." I hung up the phone. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. I didn't see an old woman anymore. I saw a mother who had finally realized that true love wasn't about endless, unconditional sacrifice. Sometimes, true love meant protecting the innocent by utterly destroying the guilty. Harrison had drawn his final card. He had shifted the spotlight onto Clara, sitting back in the shadows, expecting us to crumble under the weight of the justice system. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. He had forgotten that I was the victim in this criminal case. I was the target of the poisoning. And in the eyes of the law and the eyes of the police, my word held ultimate weight. If Harrison wanted to play the role of the devoted, heartbroken son, I would give him exactly what he wanted. I would give him the performance of a lifetime. And then, when he was standing on the very edge of his hollow victory, I would push him into the abyss. The precinct smelled of floor wax, stale donuts, and the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. I walked through the double-glass doors, leaning heavily on a cane I didn't actually need, my posture hunched, my hands visibly trembling. Clara was in an interrogation room down the hall, flanked by the brilliant, ruthless defense attorney Arthur and Davis had procured for us. But I wasn't there for Clara. I was there to give Harrison the performance he had been waiting his entire life to see. I found him sitting in the main bullpen, his head in his hands, playing the picture of a devastated husband. Detective Miller was standing next to him, speaking in low, comforting tones. "Harrison!" I cried out, letting my voice crack with frail, elderly desperation. He looked up, and for a fraction of a second, I saw the cold, calculating panic in his eyes. He didn't know what I knew. He didn't know if Clara had told me about the laptop or if I had spoken to the police. I stumbled forward, letting the cane clatter to the linoleum floor, and threw my arms around his neck. "Oh, my boy, my poor boy," I wailed, burying my face in his shoulder. The detective called me. I came as fast as I could. "Tell me it isn't true, Harrison. Tell me Clara didn't do this." I felt the tension drain out of his body in one massive, shuddering exhale. He wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my silver hair. He thought he had won. He thought I had swallowed his lie hook, line, and sinker. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he choked out, forcing a sob into his voice. "I didn't want to believe it either. But the police? They found the search history on her laptop. She bought the poison. She tried to take you away from us." I pulled back, looking at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. But why? Why would she do something so evil? "Money," Harrison whispered, playing the tragic victim flawlessly. "We've been having some financial trouble lately. She knew my inheritance would fix it. She intercepted the chocolates I sent you, laced them, and meant to give them to you later. But the kids found them first. She almost killed our babies, Mom." Detective Miller stepped forward, looking at me with deep sympathy. "Mrs. Vance, we have enough circumstantial evidence to hold your daughter-in-law. Given the gravity of the charges, bail will likely be denied. Your son is going to need your support." "Of course," I stammered, putting a hand to my chest. "He is my son. I will do everything in my power to protect him. I'll hire lawyers. I stopped. I let my eyes roll back slightly. I grabbed Harrison's forearm with a sudden, vicious grip, and then I let my knees give out. "Mom!" Harrison yelled as I collapsed against him, dead weight. "Get a medic!" Detective Miller shouted, the bullpen erupting into chaos. I lay on the cold floor, my eyes half closed, my breathing shallow and erratic. I wasn't having a heart attack, but I was simulating the symptoms of a transient ischemic attack. A mini-stroke, to absolute perfection. Paramedics rushed in, loading me onto a gurney, strapping an oxygen mask to my face. Harrison rode with me in the back of the ambulance, holding my hand, looking appropriately terrified. He wasn't terrified that I was dying. He was terrified that I might die before Clara was convicted, which could complicate his inheritance. I was kept in the hospital overnight for observation. The doctors, finding nothing physically wrong with my heart, chalked it up to extreme emotional trauma and stress. I was discharged the next afternoon with strict orders for bed rest and home care, and who better to provide that care than my devoted son? With Clara sitting in a holding cell, a terrifying but necessary sacrifice we had agreed upon during our frantic phone call, Harrison moved into my guest room to take care of me. The trap was set. Now I just needed to place the bait. On my second night at home, the rain returned, drumming a relentless, gloomy rhythm against the roof. I was propped up in my own bed, surrounded by pill bottles and a heart monitor the hospital had provided. Harrison brought me a bowl of lukewarm chicken broth on a tray. "Thank you, sweetheart," I murmured, my voice raspy and weak. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching me take a slow sip. "You need to rest, Mom. The police have everything under control. Clara's arraignment is on Monday." "I know," I sighed, letting my hand fall limply onto the quilt. "Harrison, this whole ordeal has made me realize how fragile life is. My heart. The doctors say I need to avoid all stress." "You're going to be fine, Mom." "No, listen to me," I insisted, reaching out to grasp his hand. "If Clara goes to prison, you are going to be a single father. You are going to need resources, a lot of them. I've decided what I have to do." Harrison's eyes locked onto mine. The mask of the grieving husband slipped just a fraction, revealing the hungry, desperate predator underneath. "What do you mean?" "I called Arthur Pendleton this afternoon," I lied smoothly. "I told him to draft a new will. I am leaving everything directly to you, Harrison. The house, my savings, my retirement accounts. I'm removing the provisions for the grandchildren, so Clara can't try to access it through them. I want you to have total control. You need it to fight her in court." Harrison swallowed hard. His pulse was beating visibly in his throat. "Mom, you don't have to do that right now. Just focus on getting better." "No, I insist. Arthur and a notary are coming here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. I'm going to sign the papers, and then I can finally rest in peace." I closed my eyes, letting my breathing slow, pretending to drift off to sleep. Harrison stayed on the edge of the bed for a long time. I could feel his gaze burning into my skin. He was doing the math in his head. If I signed that will tomorrow morning, Arthur Pendleton, a forensic accountant, would be sitting in my living room. Arthur would bring my financial portfolios. Arthur would ask questions. Arthur would likely uncover the massive credit card debt, the second mortgage, and the fraudulent life insurance policy. The entire house of cards would collapse right in front of me. But if I died tonight? If I died tonight, under the immense stress of my daughter-in-law's betrayal, holding my frail heart, my existing, old will would simply pass everything to my next of kin. Harrison. He would get the house, the life insurance payout, and the debts would be buried with me. He couldn't wait for tomorrow. He had no choice. I heard him stand up. I heard the soft click of my bedroom door closing as he left. I opened my eyes in the dark. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my mind was icy and clear. I reached under my pillow and tapped the screen of my burner phone once. It was a signal. He took the bait. "Move in." 2 hours passed. The house was utterly silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the steady patter of the rain. At 1:14 a.m., the brass handle of my bedroom door slowly, silently turned. I kept my eyes closed, breathing in a deep, even rhythm. The hinges creaked microscopically. Soft footsteps crossed the Persian rug, stopping right beside my bed. I could smell him. The faint scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp, sour odor of nervous sweat. "Mom?" he whispered. It wasn't a question to wake me. It was a test to ensure I was deeply asleep. I didn't move. I heard the faint crinkle of plastic, then the soft, distinct pop of a plastic cap being pulled off a syringe. Potassium chloride. I had researched it after discovering the life insurance policy. It was a chemical compound used in lethal injections. Injected directly into the bloodstream or an IV line, it causes massive, instantaneous cardiac arrest. Because it is a naturally occurring mineral in the body, it is incredibly difficult for a standard coroner to detect unless they are specifically looking for a pinpoint injection mark. It was the perfect, untraceable weapon for a man staging a stress-induced heart attack. "You really were a good mother, you know," Harrison whispered in the dark. His voice was different now. The frantic, strained tone was gone. He sounded calm, detached, almost conversational. It was the voice of a man who believed he was entirely untouchable. "You gave me everything. But that was your problem, Evelyn. You gave too much. You were weak. You let people walk all over you. Dad did it, I did it, and you just smiled and baked another casserole." I felt a cold rush of air as he pulled the quilt down slightly, exposing my left arm. "I didn't want to do this," he continued, his tone turning into a sickening kind of self-pity. "But you put me in an impossible position. If you had just eaten the damn chocolate on your birthday, none of this would have happened. Clara wouldn't be in a cell. The kids wouldn't have gotten sick. But you had to be the martyr." I felt the cool tip of his fingers tracing the vein in the crook of my elbow. "It's ironic, really," Harrison murmured. "You spent your whole life saving me, and now your death is going to save me one last time. The insurance money will clear the debts. The IRS will back off. I'll sell this house, take the kids, and start over. And Clara? Well, Clara will take the fall. She always was a little too naive for her own good." He pressed his thumb against my vein, preparing to plunge the needle. "Goodbye, Mom." "You talk too much, Harrison." I opened my eyes. Harrison froze. The syringe hovered an inch above my skin, glinting in the faint moonlight filtering through the blinds. He stared down at me, his jaw slack, his brain struggling to process why the frail, dying woman was looking at him with eyes as sharp as cut glass. Before he could react, before he could plunge the needle or run, the darkness of the bedroom was shattered. Blinding tactical flashlights erupted from the walk-in closet and the ensuite bathroom. "FBI! Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" The room was suddenly filled with bodies. Special Agent Carter, a tall, imposing woman in body armor, burst from the closet, her service weapon leveled directly at Harrison's chest. Detective Miller lunged from the bathroom, tackling Harrison to the floor. The syringe spun out of his hand, skittering under the dresser. "Harrison Vance, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Evelyn Vance." Agent Carter's voice boomed over the sound of the struggle. Harrison was pinned to the floor, his face pressed into the rug, his arms wrenched violently behind his back. The sharp snap of handcuffs echoed like a gunshot. I sat up slowly, pushing the quilt aside. I wasn't frail. I wasn't weak. I looked down at the man thrashing on my floor, stripping away the last, lingering shred of maternal illusion. He wasn't my boy anymore. He was just a monster I had accidentally invited into my home. The bedroom door opened and Clara walked in. She was flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Her eyes were red, but her posture was rigid, triumphant. She looked down at her husband with an expression of absolute, freezing disgust. Harrison twisted his head, seeing Clara, seeing the FBI, seeing me sitting up in bed. His mind finally snapped the pieces together. The fake stroke, the perfectly timed lie about the will, the hidden microphones Agent Carter had installed in my room while Harrison was at the grocery store that afternoon. You set me up!" Harrison screamed, spit flying from his lips, his voice cracking with hysterical disbelief. "You trapped me." "You trapped yourself, Harrison," I said calmly, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. "I just opened the door and let you walk in." "It won't work," he shrieked, thrashing against Detective Miller's grip. "You have nothing. It's my word against yours. The kids ate the thallium. I wasn't even in the state. Clara's laptop." "Stop talking, you idiot," Clara snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. I stood up, walking slowly over to where my son was pinned to the floor. I looked down at him, feeling a profound, terrifying sense of peace. "You're right about one thing, Harrison. The hospital did find thallium in the children's toxicology reports, a microscopic trace amount. But do you want to know the funniest part of your master plan?" Harrison stopped thrashing, staring up at me with wild, terrified eyes. "You were so clever," I said softly, crouching down so he could hear every word perfectly. "You injected the lethal dose of thallium into just one truffle, the dark cherry one. Because you knew it was my favorite. You knew I would eat that one, and you wanted to leave the others safe just in case Clara or the kids asked for a bite. It was a calculated risk. I leaned in closer. But children hate dark chocolate, Harrison, and they absolutely despise bitter cherry liqueur. Lily took one tiny bite of the cherry truffle, spat it into a napkin, and threw it in the trash. The trace amount she ingested made her sick. The sheer volume of rich, adult chocolate the kids ate on an empty stomach gave them violent gastroenteritis. They were never dying. They just had terrible stomach bugs. The color drained from Harrison's face entirely. He looked like a corpse. The only person who knew there was a lethal dose of thallium in that box, I whispered, was the person who put it there. When Clara called you from the ER to tell you the kids were sick, a normal father would have asked what was wrong. But you panicked. You assumed they ate the cherry truffle. You asked me, did you eat the chocolates? You exposed yourself out of pure, guilty paranoia. And the laptop? Agent Carter added, stepping forward. Harrison Vance, we have the IP logs from your office in Silicon Valley. You remote accessed your home network via a VPN to make those dark web purchases on your wife's computer while she was sleeping. You left a digital fingerprint a mile wide. Harrison stared at me, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The realization of his total catastrophic failure crushed the air out of his lungs. He hadn't been outsmarted by a team of super spies. He had been outsmarted by an elderly widow and a stay-at-home mother who simply decided to stop being victims. Get him out of my house, I told Detective Miller, standing up and turning my back on him. Mom! Harrison shrieked as they hauled him to his feet. It was the desperate, pathetic cry of a cornered animal. Mom, please, I'm your son. You can't do this. Mom! I didn't turn around. I didn't flinch. I stood by the window and watched the red and blue lights of the police cruisers strobing against the rain-slicked driveway. I listened to his screams fade as they dragged him down the stairs, out the front door, and into the back of a squad car. When the front door finally slammed shut, the house fell into a profound, heavy silence. Clara walked over to me. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in 10 years, it wasn't a forced embrace. We held on to each other, two survivors standing in the wreckage of the life a monster had built for us. We wept, not for Harrison, but for the years we had lost to his manipulation, and for the profound relief that we would never, ever be afraid of him again. The justice system is rarely swift, but in Harrison's case it was a landslide. Faced with the audio recording of his confession in my bedroom, the attempted injection of potassium chloride, the forensic accounting of his massive fraud, and the digital proof of his dark web purchases, his expensive defense attorneys folded. They didn't even take it to trial. Harrison Vance pleaded guilty to 2 counts of attempted murder in the first degree, severe identity theft, wire fraud, and framing an innocent person. The judge, a stern woman who looked at Harrison with undisguised contempt, did not show leniency. He was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He tried to look at me during the sentencing. He sat at the defense table, his hair thinning, his expensive suit replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his eyes pleading for a scrap of the unconditional love I used to freely give. I looked right through him. The irrevocable trust protected Lily and Mason's college funds. Clara filed for divorce, taking full custody of the children and a restraining order that ensured Harrison could never contact them again. She sold the massive hollow house in the suburbs and bought a beautiful, cozy cottage just 3 miles from my home. As for me, I didn't retreat into the shadows of my quiet colonial house. The fire that Harrison had ignited inside me didn't burn out. It just found a new purpose. With Clara's help, and utilizing a portion of the retirement savings I had fought so hard to protect, I established the Evelyn Vance Foundation. We dedicated our resources to helping older women and stay-at-home mothers recognize the signs of financial abuse and gaslighting. We provided forensic accountants, legal counsel, and therapy to women who had been convinced by the men in their lives that they were crazy, weak, or dependent. I am 72 years old now. It's a Tuesday afternoon. The autumn air in Connecticut is carrying that familiar chill, but my house isn't quiet anymore. Lily and Mason are sitting at my kitchen island, arguing over a math worksheet while eating the gluten-free oatmeal cookies Clara baked. Clara is sitting across from me, reviewing a legal brief for one of the women our foundation is helping this month. I look around my kitchen, I look at the family I fought for, the family I saved, and the woman I became in the process. Harrison thought I was a martyr. He thought I was a woman whose only purpose was to sacrifice herself on the altar of his ambition. He was wrong. I was a mother, and he completely forgot that a mother will sacrifice anything for her child, but she will also destroy anything that threatens her family, even if the threat is her own son. I pick up my teacup, taking a sip, and smile. Life is deeply, wonderfully sweet, and I don't miss the dark cherry truffles at all.